Today's episode of Keep Diggin' is sponsored by Yeager Funeral Home in Ligonier, Indiana, serving Northeast Indiana with sensitivity, compassion, and respect for over a decade. My friend Daniel and his staff remind you to keep pushing forward and embrace the faith, family, and the fight of life to just keep digging. You can call them at 260-894-4900 or online at YeagerFuneralHome.com.
Faith, family, fight. Going through the fight of your life?
How you want to fight?
You're not alone. Keep digging. Keep digging. Keep digging. It's time to keep digging, and here's your host, Gran Roberts.
I want to say welcome back to my diggers. Guys, this is Gran Roberts, your host here for Keep Digging. Guys, it's been too long. It's been a while. Life kind of threw us some curveballs, but we are back and we are fighting harder than ever here on the only podcast for faith, family, and fight. I want to thank Sean Browning of Grave Robber for an excellent sit-down in episode 11 for allowing us to spend some time with him. Guys, I love music. I love Christ. I love sitting down and talking about it. And I think with what Sean does, there's a lot of misconceptions there. Christian punk rock. Now, he doesn't call himself a Christian band, but he is unapologetically Christian, as he talked about in the show. And to find out how he serves the audience with the gift of punk rock. Man, what a neat, interesting, and creative way to get God's message out there. So, guys, I hope you enjoyed the show as well. If you haven't listened to it, man, go back into the archive, episode 11, and check that out. Guys, we have some exciting changes coming to the podcast in the coming weeks. That's one of the reasons why you haven't heard us here lately. We've taken a couple months to kind of tweak the format, tweak the podcast, and we have additional changes that are going to be coming. You'll know when you hear them. But one of the changes, the first changes you guys probably heard, is we've added a sponsor. The sponsor is Yeager Funeral Home. Our friend Dan Blevins and the rest of the staff at Yeager and Ligonier have been longtime listeners to the show. They want to jump on board, and we're really appreciative of that. We appreciate the support, and man, I am really looking forward to that relationship. And I got to tell you, the irony in a funeral home and the phrase "keep digging," it's not lost on me. It's amazing. Guys, if you too would like to show your support to the show, man, you can do that in a variety of different ways. Sponsorships, additional sponsorships are available on the show. If your business or yourself are interested in becoming a sponsor, you can do so by calling 260-205-7318 or via email at KeepDiggin Today. That's keep, D-I-G-G-I-N, no G, today at gmail.com. Now, you can also support the show by sharing each episode on your social media outlet. You can find our episodes wherever you get your podcasts, iTunes, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Podbean, Spotify, just to name a few. Also, be sure to subscribe, rate, and review. Leave us a review. We'd really appreciate that. Those things help us get moved up into the search rankings and allows us to reach more people here at Keep Diggin'. Like I said, more changes are coming in the near future to Keep Digging. A number of great topics are being discussed to bring to you, my fellow diggers. Now, keep your ears peeled in the coming weeks because you may be hearing some new voices joining the show, so stay tuned. This week on Keep Digging, I'm talking with my friend Eric Lang. Today's episode is one I hope you guys get a lot out of. It's not designed to be a praise type show. Instead, it's designed to be a show that's going to step on your toes a little bit, and I hope it does. It's not going to be your ordinary, everyday Christian podcast. And you might be saying, well, man, Gran, why would you do that? Well, in order to grow, we got to kind of look at what we're not really good at, where we're failing in our walk, where we're failing in our faith. And in order to do that, we have to get real with ourselves. As Christians, we often find ourselves in situations where people don't believe like we do. They don't believe the same. There's atheists, there's agnostics out there. And often we take it upon ourselves, we have to convince these people of our faith. It's a I'm right, you're wrong situation. And I'm telling you guys, straight up, that is the wrong way to go about this. And you might be saying, well, Gran, we need to stand up for the word. We need to stand up for the Bible, our beliefs, our Christianity. To love our neighbor like we love ourselves. We are not showing love if we're showing disrespect. We are not showing love if we're treating them, hatefully. And we're definitely not showing them love if we're writing them off. And I'm going to be honest with you. I had Christian friends that they didn't want me to do this episode. I think it's because, they thought I was walking into a trap, so to speak, which is ridiculous. You ought to be able to talk to your friends regardless of what they believe. You ought to have enough respect for each other to have a good conversation. And then as far as faith goes, you should be confident enough in your faith that it's just not an issue. You should be willing and you should be seeking conversations with people that don't often believe like you do. Because how else are we going to better serve them? How else are we going to better witness? We need to find common ground. It's okay to not agree all the time. Now, with that being said, would I like to see my friend Eric as a Christian? You bet. But until that time comes, and Eric, I know you're listening. Love you, buddy. We need to treat each other with love and respect and keep doors open, keep common ground, to agree to disagree at times. And that's okay. I think in today's world, we've kind of forgotten how to do that. And we need to be able to have conversations with someone like Eric, who's an agnostic, and learn how to do it appropriately. Because believe it or not, when we don't arm ourselves properly, it can actually push people away. And not just push them away, but cause great hurt. It can close doors. How in the world are we ever going to win people over for Christ if we're pushing them out? Like I said, we may not agree. We may not get why some people make the decisions that they make. But again, that's not for us to decide. Our sole purpose is to serve people in the name of Christ, to be humble, and to be a servant leader. And unfortunately, in Eric's life, that hasn't totally happened. He's had a few people that have been that to him, that have shown him Christ, but have also shown him love, even though he made a decision to become an atheist and then an agnostic. My pastor, Joey Nelson. Joey shows him love just like he would me. And I love that. He hasn't written him off. And today we're going to talk to Eric about his journey, his life, and we're also going to talk to him about how he went from a Christian to an atheist to an agnostic, some of the misconceptions that people believe, and I'm going to start just throwing questions out. I'm curious. I want to know what he believes. I want to know why he believes it. Today's not an episode where I'm trying to convince Eric of anything. That's not the point of the show at all. Instead, I just want to get to know him. I just want to have that conversation. Like I said, would I like to see that someday? You bet. But instead of trying to change Eric, what I'm hoping is I can help change you. That God will use this podcast, this episode, to help change your actions, especially towards people that don't believe like you do, and to encourage you to open some doors, maybe even reach out. Reach out to Eric even. Maybe you did write him off. Maybe you did treat him with some disrespect or get mad at him or frustrated. Eric's going through a similar health battle that I've been going through. And I get it. I'm on that road myself. And it's at times like this that guys like Eric need community. They need love. They need friendship. Now, you're going to hear later on in the conversation, like, one of the misconceptions is when people say, I'll pray for you. I always thought that would be offensive. Truth is, he's fine with that because it's someone saying, hey, I care about you. I love you. I'm going to do what I think is going to help you. And I was surprised to hear that. That's amazing. I think there's a lot of things about Eric that is completely misunderstood. I hope it offends you in the way that you realize, man, I need to handle myself better. Look at my faith, and instead of really using it to throw stones, that I'm using it to tear down walls instead of building them. Because unfortunately, after listening to Eric's story, you're going to understand that was exactly what happened in a lot of ways. Now, with that being said, he knows he's not without fault. He knows he's done some things. He said some things that have hurt a lot of people. But he did out of hurt and did out of loss in a lot of ways. So, guys, I hope this really opens your eyes. I hope this allows you to see Eric not as someone that is a non-believer, but as one of God's children, as someone that is a person with value, someone that we are supposed to love as we love ourselves. Guys, I hope you look at this episode as a starting point and an ending point. Ending in the regard of, you know what, I'm going to change how I'm reacting and how I'm communicating with people like Eric with different belief sets. And a starting point for new behaviors, new attitudes, to love people like Eric that may not believe the way you believe, to treat them with respect, and to reconnect with them. Eric's on a health journey much like my own. And it's times like that you need friends, you need support, you need community. You don't need walls. And we as Christians are supposed to show that love. So, guys, I want to encourage you. Get out there, build those bridges, find common ground instead of trying to put up walls. And remember why we believe what we believe. We believe it because Jesus Christ died on a cross for us. He sacrificed himself for us. All right, guys, let's do this. Let's dig.
It's time now. The dig.
And it is time to dig. Guys, welcome to the Roberts Family Compound this morning. I'm having an interesting conversation today with a good friend. His name's Eric Lang. And it's a conversation that Christians don't usually get the opportunity to have in a real civil way. And I'm really looking forward to this conversation because it's going to allow us to learn something. My friend Eric was a believer at one point, and then he became atheist, and now he's agnostic. And I think from a Christian perspective, it helps to understand our agnostic friends. It helps us understand how they got to that point in their life where they made that decision. It also helps us to be able to better communicate with our friends. Because I think so often, instead of loving them where they're at, we tend to be judgmental. We tend to say things that, aren't Christ-like. Often Christ found himself with the sinners. He accepted them for where they're at. All he did was love them. We need to be doing that with our friends, regardless of where they're at in their faith or in their life or whatnot. They add value to our lives, and we need to be Jesus to them. We need to love them. We just need to be their friend. And Eric actually contacted me, and he said, "Hey, I got this idea." And after you ran it by me, he said, I think your listeners would benefit by hearing how a guy that was once a believer, that was actually on the road to going into the ministry, could end up as an agnostic now in life. I thought about it, and I thought, got a good point. So we're going to have this talk today. I'm going to do a lot of listening. We're going to ask some questions, but we're going to have a good time. We're going to have a civil conversation, and it's going to be nothing but love and respect. Eric, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Grant. It's nice to be at the compound.
Yeah. Oh, yes, the compound. This is like my version of hillbilly heaven. Eric, we have a similar family background. Your folks, was both of your folks are from West Virginia?
Yep.
Now, where at exactly?
My mom was from up near Bluefield.
Okay.
And my dad was born in a holler between Montgomery and Beckley, about 30 miles east of Charleston.
Oh, okay. Mom spent a lot of time in war, Grundy.
Yeah, well, my mom was actually went to high school there. Yeah, at first they lived in a coal camp in war.
Sure. One of the interesting things about like the conversation we're going to have, I think it relates well. We come from a long line of coal miners, and a lot of times with those coal miners, the guys you go into the ground with, so to speak, a lot of times they're family members. They're your friends, but, they have your back while you're down underneath ground and, when things are really dangerous. And then when you come out of the ground, they're also the same people you break bread with. And a lot of times on Sundays, the people you went to church with. So your job and your family and your faith life were all kind of the same. To deny one of those things was really dangerous. If you didn't believe a certain way religiously, it's almost like your family at times kind of exiled you. Some families more than others. Some were just, I know I got family right now that they're just like, Grant and his Christian rock.
My mom grew up going to a Pentecostal church, so.
Ooh, you get it then.
Yeah.
So Eric, let's go back. In order for us to understand how you got to where you're at, it's really important for us to understand the faith life that you had and your history with it leading up to it. Now, when you were growing up, was religion something that was in the house? Was it something, I mean, did you guys go to church or was it spoken of?
Well, I'd say the first 8-9 years of my life, my parents, where they worked a 6-2 shift. So they only got a Sunday off every 6-7 weeks.
Sure.
I actually went to a Mennonite church up in Topeka with my grandma. I mean, my parents talked about religion, but it was never a shove it down your throat type deal. I grew up with very liberal parents.
Sure.
My dad was involved in politics, and for somebody that grew up in the 40s and 50s in West Virginia, he progressed his life pretty liberally. It was never pushed down my throat. And, after that, I stopped going with my grandma, whatever. She got older. Well, she passed away when I was 11. I'd go to, do the stuff at school,
Campus life.
Yeah, I did campus life. I was part of the church group at Stones Hill. Did the normal, Tri-County lock-ins and, things like that, but never really went on Sundays. Again, my parents usually worked a 6-2 schedule. I'd go to church with friends or whatever, spent the night, but I was always free to question and keep my mind open, I guess.
So you had some experiences. You had, pretty much a normal teenage life when it comes to, hanging out in the church with the youth group and whatnot. At what point do you make that decision to accept Christ?
That's actually not until a little later on. I graduated, went to college, and basically enjoyed my 20s like most people do. Never really gave a thought to religion.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't until after I got married and my wife was a Christian that I started going.
Oh, okay.
It more started as just a way to make her happy.
Sure.
But then, I got involved and, I started to believe. Took classes, we took classes together and, financial peace and, you name it, did a men's club, Joshua's club where, we read a book a month and we had a meeting,
Yeah, definitely.
And I think it was more the pastor that was going is what got me, I don't want to say hooked, but.
Oh, yeah. Piqued your interest.
Yeah. He was from, the same area as my dad, and we just had a lot in common. And when he moved here, his kids were young enough, and I used to coach his kids in wrestling and stuff like that. And I helped, Levi, and that's what got me going regularly. And for the most part, I did notice a difference, not in a spiritual way, but just the way that I was living my life. I don't know if it was me growing up too at the same time, married, having kids. I started to believe, and then decided to actually pursue the ministry. I was thinking really hard about it.
Oh, wow.
For me, I love science and history, and I was kind of going to take a Lee Strobel approach to.
It's good stuff.
I was involved for a number of years. I was baptized. I cried like everybody else when I was baptized.
Oh, totally. So at what point do you start to question your faith?
I don't want to put this on my wife, but as we were going to church and we were taking these classes, I was feeling, doing things differently, but it seemed like she wasn't. And I mean, that started it a little bit, but it didn't really shake my faith. I was just like, you're just not trying.
Yeah.
It wasn't that she wasn't trying. She was more living what she saw, coming from a split home. It got to a point to where I couldn't rectify what I knew to be true and real from science to believing in the Bible. And that I slowly started peeling the onion back. I'm not your usual agnostic or whatever. I've read the Bible. I believed it. I lived it. But that slowly started to peel it back to where I just, I started to distance myself, and I just couldn't make the mental leap.
Yeah.
I remember we were at the church for New Year's Eve and we were playing a game, and somebody made a joke about something being as real as evolution and the Big Bang. And that was just clicked. It's like, I can at least prove one of those.
Eric, that seems to be a common situation between Christians and agnostics and atheists. Anytime a biblical point of view is brought up in comparison to science, typically there's a disagreement there. I if I'm going to be honest with you, I hate it when Christians do that.
Yeah. An example, when you talk about, the age of the earth, most Christians believe it's a little over 6,000 years old. If you're a fundamentalist, you believe in the Bible word for word. But we have trees that are living that are 10,000 years old. So you can't dispute what you see with a book that was written And I don't want to, I know a lot of people, the Bible is there, but I mean, if you honestly look at it, it was, written 400 years after the events of Christ. For me, it's basically fact versus fiction.
Yeah, I think one thing that we as Christians tend to do is we tend to use the Bible in our arguments, like with Christians and agnostics. I even hate to say the word argument, because we should never be having arguments, especially the people we care about and we love. I mean, you and I may not agree on the whole evolution thing and about creation and how it came to be, but like, I still love and respect you to death, man. That really hits me in my core when I think about how Christians will start using the Bible as a weapon in terms of pointing fingers and trying to prove a point. Because like, they might believe in that Bible, but the person such as yourself, you might not believe in it. If the person you're talking to doesn't believe in it, you might as well not use it, because it's kind of useless at that point. One approach I've always found that's been more civil, because it leaves the Bible completely out of it. And it's not that I try to convince anybody. Your faith or lack of faith, that's your choice, and it's your life. Now, I want people to have faith, don't get me wrong, but that's between you and God, in the way my faith teaches me to believe. But I tend to use references, and you've probably, you're well versed. You've probably heard these names before. Josephus was not a Christian, wrote a book. It was a secular, non-Christian historical book, and he was the first author outside the church to mention Jesus in a historical way, documented. And he wrote about Judaism right around AD 93. So we're talking 93 years after Christ. And he made 2 references to Jesus, and even one reference to James, his brother, quoting him as Jesus, the so-called Christ. So that's documentation. I'm not throwing the Bible at an agnostic or an atheist. And the other one that I use often, because the reason I use this, it creates a good conversation. It's not your normal throwing scripture at somebody. I think it's just easy for a Christian to just start throwing scriptures out that they've heard all their life instead of really thinking it through.
Well, and I don't discount his writings at the time.
Sure.
Or even the fact that there very well could have been a real man named Jesus. I'm not disputing that maybe there was a man named Jesus, but was he God incarnate? Was he the Son of God?
Yeah. That brings up a good question, man. What? Because you went from being a Christian to initially an atheist.
Yeah.
If you had to describe the difference between the two, for those of us that may not understand the difference between an atheist and an agnostic, how would you describe that?
An atheist, which I don't believe there's any true atheists. I mean, if you don't believe in a creator, you're still agnostic, because it's a question that we can't answer. I can't know for sure there is no God or there is one. So an atheist just flat out says, no, there's no God. What we see is what's here. I can't make that leap any more than I can make the leap the other way, because it's an unknown. And until there are facts to support it, I mean, I'm willing to believe anything, but it's got to have the facts to support it. So an atheist, just no religion, no God, I could be wrong. And, God created the Big Bang and started evolution. I mean, that's what the Catholics believe. So, I mean, I don't discount that there could be a God. You're just looking for proof. Yeah.
I see. That makes sense. I like how you put that, because when we had first talked, because I thought you were still atheist, and we initially talked, you contacted me and you said you're agnostic, and I thought, oh, wait a minute. For a lot of us, we kind of think sometimes those are interchangeable in some regard until you really get down in the dirt of it. Now, when you made that decision to become an atheist, you left the church. What was that like for you?
That was when I was probably, I would say, an atheist. And I never really put it out there, but I was never asked what my beliefs were. They just wrote me off as, well, I'm evil. I remember one guy that I knew well, all he kept telling me was the devil had a hold of me because I believe in science. Okay. When I first left the church, save for a couple people, everybody was angry at me.
Yeah.
Because I was disavowing their faith or however you want to put it. My wife was still a Christian at the time. She no longer is. And I didn't make her, she still went to church when I quit. That was not,
Sure.
I still believe that's somebody's individual choice. So I got angry because all of these people that said they loved me, they were my friends, and stopped talking to me. So that kind of fueled the anger. I mean, losing your faith is hard enough because you put, your whole life into it. And then you make something clicks and you don't feel it. I'm hard pressed to, other than maybe when I was baptized, ever really had an emotional experience at church.
Yeah.
Other than if they played a good song. I never had that aha moment that a lot of people talk about. I still believed, but I just figured that's the way it was. And if I did have an emotional moment, now looking back, I chalk it up to, the same way you watch a good movie and, the hair on the back of your neck stands up. Kind of that, the mind, making you feel something that's not there. So that was probably, I call myself an angry atheist at that point.
Okay.
Because I was angry at the world because, one, I felt lied to. Two, all my friends, to stop talking to me.
Wow. At this point, you made that decision, and now you're living life as an angry atheist, as you called yourself. How do you react to people? When they would bring up, Christ, when they would bring up certain things, I'm going to say I remember sometimes on social media. I realize now you're not that guy. You're not, it seemed like there was a period of time where maybe you're butting heads with a lot of people. And honestly, they were also not being so nice to you.
Yeah. And we were talking about earlier, on Facebook, I scroll by Christian posts all the time. I don't comment. But the minute I put something on there that goes the least bit against somebody's faith, you ought to see the inbox light up.
Oh yeah, I kind of likened it earlier to, I'm a comic geek. I mean, I love comic books, and if I see someone commenting on my news feed about Superman, chances are I'm going to chime in. I can't imagine chiming in on something because it is an interest, much like you with your interest in science, and all of a sudden having 30 people that are supposed to be loving me, regardless of what I believe, completely tear me apart. I get that, and I can understand how that would hurt. I could see how you would feel that betrayal in that way. And if we relate it back to the early analogy with the coal miners, to deny your faith would almost be like to deny your family and your job. And it's kind of what you went through.
Yeah, basically. I was ostracized is how I felt. It was, my opinion didn't matter anymore. I was the spawn of the devil, and I was no good.
Now, how much of that feeling that you have do you think is what you feel to be the truth, and how much do you think it might be the anger too?
Oh, it was definitely a little bit of both. That's why, after, I don't know, I'd say 6 months or so, I just stopped bringing it up and, lived my life. Nobody still, asked me, well, what's going on? What do you?
Yeah. Because
I'll gladly talk about it. I love debating the subject. I mean, I love debating politics. Well, until for the last couple of years, I haven't. But it seems like nobody can have a rational conversation or debate without getting angry.
Yeah.
I mean, you hurt my feelings, my God, or, whoa, we're just having a conversation here,
And to your credit, you said earlier in our conversation, and actually when you approached me to have this conversation, you said, I was immature then. I said a lot of things maybe I shouldn't have said. I can imagine you said it out of anger. Well,
and I'll preface it, it's not an excuse, but around that same time, both my parents died. The house I grew up in caught on fire. So I was going through a whole bunch of, life stuff.
Sure.
On top of that, everybody just kept piling on me, and I just, I snapped. I reacted emotionally. I'm only human.
Oh, sure. Now, Eric, knowing that, and maybe you've been asked this before, and I apologize if you have, but I know how much my parents mean to me, and they're not completely well. I worry about that. Losing them would be hard. How much of that do you think is, as a son, losing your parents can cause a huge void? And honestly, I could see how it would make you question things.
I had actually started questioning before they died.
Okay.
But I hadn't left the church or anything yet. I basically co-preached at the church for my dad's funeral.
Sure.
it left a void, but I was lucky enough with both of my parents to be able to have that talk. There were no secrets between me and my parents. And that added to the closure. I mean, that helped immensely because I got to tell my dad how much he meant to me and how much I appreciate everything he got to do, or he did for me as a child.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm not going to lie. It's a void, but I never really conflated it with religion.
Gotcha.
If that makes sense. You know, I wasn't really a believer when my dad died, but you know, I played the part for him more so than for me.
Gotcha.
And actually I learned, and this might sound weird, but unless you've gone through it, it's almost easier for me to get over death in general anymore because I don't have the religious, I don't want to say fantasy, but the religious idea that my parents are watching over me and things of that nature.
Yeah. So what do you think of death? Like, you know, from a Christian perspective, if we've gotten right with the Lord, we've handed our life over to him and asked for forgiveness, and we believe in our salvation, and, you know, our reward is heaven. What do you believe? If somebody came up to you and said, Eric, what do you think happens when you die? What do you tell them?
You cease to exist. For me, I think it'll be no more different than before I was born, if that makes sense. I just won't, exist. I mean, there's scientific, tests and studies going on now about, what happens to consciousness because, they realize that consciousness goes on a short while after you're dead. So, I mean, again, it's an unknown, kind of like, Occam's razor. If I were to die and find out that I was wrong, I would ask God, well, why didn't you give me the information? If you created me to think logically, reason, understand, and we were able to do all of this, why didn't you give us a better sign? If I had the faith, or if and I know it's supposed to be faith, but if I had the facts, then I would have the faith.
Faith is something that it can be really hard to accept. It's a belief in something, yet you don't see it. And often we find ourselves having faith in a lot of different things. We don't realize it, like wind. You don't see wind. Another one's gravity. You don't see gravity. You just, it's there. As a Christian, my faith is much like that. I feel like I know it's there, even though I don't see it. I had that aha moment, as you said. I've had it in the hospital not long ago, actually. It's like a comfort. That's the best way to describe it. I just get comfort in times I shouldn't have it, honestly.
And I totally understand that. I mean, I can see religion as a coping mechanism. It's a coping method, but it also deceives you from reality at times. I like to make the analogy that, God gets a free pass no matter what. If he makes it, if a person's dying and they live, it's a miracle. If they die, it's God's will. Either which way, God's got an out.
I got you. I can see how you would think that.
So, and I've been on death's door. One time when I was in the hospital, my organs were shutting down. My wife and I had to have that conversation.
Oh, been there. I get it.
And this is like at Christmas. I spent Christmas in the hospital. Not once did I ever pray to anybody to save me. It was, what medicines are they going to give me? It was never throw my hands up in the air moment, God save me. I don't want to die.
Now, were you fearful?
Was I afraid to die? Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And it wasn't so much I was afraid to die. I was afraid to leave my wife and children.
I got you. Yeah, that's how I felt.
Even now, work up to get a liver transplant.
Yeah.
The doctors are going to save me, not an invisible person I can't see, I guess, is how I look at it.
Let me ask you this, Eric. You said that if you would go to heaven, like if you died and you found out there was a God, and you had that talk with him, like, well, why didn't you tell me, or why didn't you give me a sign? What would be proof for you? What would you consider, that's it, that'll prove to me that that's a God? I'm curious about that.
To be omnipotent, omnipresent. I don't know what test we could do to fact check that, if you will.
Sure.
Then I know that's why you're supposed to rely on faith.
Sure.
But not just Christianity. I mean, there's been millions and millions upon millions of people killed in the name of one God or another.
Sure. Yeah.
I mean, right now there's something like 3,000 different gods being worshipped on planet Earth.
Yeah.
So who's right? Or is it all a construct of man?
So basically what you're saying is if you had proof, you would totally be open to...
Oh, yeah, I'll believe anything as long as the facts lead me there.
Okay. It's interesting to hear that. I think that's probably some of the misconceptions that Christians have about people that are either atheists or agnostic. Are there any other misconceptions you can think of that, man, Christians get all wrong about you?
Well, again, the Bible. I can't believe the Bible word for word, but if you were to read the Bible, it would be like the Jefferson Bible. You know, he ripped out all the crap, but the words of Jesus. And I'm fine with that. I mean, I help out. I volunteer. I've done a lot of things, but I don't do it for an eternal reward. I do it because it makes me feel good and I want to contribute to society.
Sure. So you don't totally discount the Bible. You think it has some value.
Oh, yeah. You read some of the parables, of Jesus. If you take them for what they are, they can be helpful.
Sure.
Another thing that makes especially agnostics mad is when Christians pick and choose from the Bible.
I think what happens is, and I've seen it in my life, having grown up in the old regular Baptist religion, it's very, very legalistic. And I had a hard time, and I still have a hard time sometimes with that. My mom goes to an old regular Baptist church, and great people there, don't get me wrong, but you grow up with a lot of tradition. You repeat a lot of what you hear. And I think as Christians, I'm not making an excuse for them, but I think they naturally go to that. I think they repeat a scripture, and they don't understand the context. They don't understand where it was that it was said, why it was said. There's a lot to that. Like, you're right. There are areas of the Bible that kind of, if you took them just word for word, man, that doesn't make sense. But when you add context to it, it's a little different then.
And then you'll have some Christians, the born again and the newer Christians that, well, no, the Old Testament doesn't work anymore. Well, Jesus says not one iota will pass until all is accomplished, not one iota of the word. He said he didn't come to erase the old law.
So you have a hard time with what you view as conflicting doctrine.
Yeah.
In a sense. So yeah, I could see how that would, from your perspective, how that would be conflicting to you when we as Christians try to force our beliefs on other people. And we forget that we ourselves went on a journey to get where we're at. I didn't walk into a church and give my life to God right away. I was pretty angry when I started going. It was a number of months before I could even look at my wife and be like, okay, I'll go, but I'm just going to hang out with you. I'm not going to listen to a preacher. That's kind of how it felt. Now, that's drastically different than what I am now. And I think when there is a difference in opinion, when you're already struggling with the conflicting scriptures from your point of view, when you add a Christian to the mix, trying to tell you you're wrong, all that does is anger you. Like, it's not showing Christ's love. That's the way I feel. I feel like Christians, instead of pointing the finger or trying to prove Christ, I think we ought to just love our friends regardless of where they're at, regardless whether they're agnostic or atheist or whatnot. Set those differences aside and find things in common.
Yeah, just have a respect for one another.
Yeah.
There's no reason that politics, religion, or anything should stop a friendship. You should be able to debate those and have an open discussion without getting your feelings hurt.
Sure.
As long as you're respectful.
Definitely. You kind of mentioned this earlier, Eric, the kind of theory of, hey, if I'm wrong, I go to heaven. God's like, hey, why don't you believe in me? There's a theory called Pascal's hangnail. That's pretty much what you described. I kind of look at it like, okay, I believe if I die, I go to heaven. Now, let's play devil's advocate. If I'm wrong and you're right, I die and I just don't exist. If I was a betting man, I'm better off believing, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I know a lot of people that feel that way. But for me, it's more staying true to myself and what I think is real.
Oh, completely. But like, if I just looked at the odds and compared them, and I admire the fact that you can hold true in spite of that. I may not agree, but it takes a special person to withstand something that they know they got something that they're risking potentially. Eternity is a scary thing. And if you're willing to say, you know what, this is I'm being true to myself. I get it. I'm not gonna lie, man. I hope one day you come over to, get the green lightsaber.
I have a blue lightsaber, thank you very much.
Oh, blue one.
Maybe I should get the gray like Ahsoka.
Hey, there you go.
No, I understand that feeling, but I also have to, what everybody's, he's a good and just God. If I live a good life and there is a God, why is he going to punish me for still living a good life? It seems to me, especially with, the way churches are today, in a lot of ways, it's just a money grab. I see that, not so much your local churches, you got those big, huge mega churches, Joel Osteen and all that, they're raking in, $100,000 a week, and none of that money is getting returned to the people or to help people. When there was a hurricane down there in Houston, they wouldn't even open their doors to let people in until the news media got a hold of it, and then they opened their doors.
Eric, I'll be honest with you, dude. Christ would believe exactly the way you believe, because often as Christians, we're represented by people like him.
Or, how many, TV preachers have said, God spoke to me and said I need a new jet.
I get it.
If he's all powerful, he could just give you one. What does God need with my money? Jesus taught on a rock.
See, I think that's where Christ and you have something in common, because I feel like he would feel the exact same way. Like, hey, that's not how one of my shepherds is supposed to be doing. Like, for example, the Westboro Baptist. I'll give you that example, right? As a Christian, I used to get so frustrated because a lot of my liberal friends would basically, every time something would come up that was church related, they compare me to them. You know me, I'm nothing like those guys.
Yeah, no, they're cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs.
I think sometimes that happens too with these mega pastors. Now, I can't say there's not a good mega pastor. There might be. That's between them and God. But I can definitely relate to what you're saying. Eric, when it comes to being agnostic, is there anything else that you wish Christians understood about you?
Not to assume that you're angry at them for being religious. I'm not angry at anybody for their religion, no matter what it is.
Sure.
That's why I love our country and the fact that you have the freedom to believe whatever you want. All I would hope for them to do is just ask questions, not assume, not immediately think you're the spawn of evil and push you away. We're no different than anybody else. We have kids, wives, families. I love you. I love my friends. I love life. And I don't need religion to give me that, but I'm not going to stop somebody else from enjoying their religion if they want.
I'm going to ask a question, and it's kind of an analogy, because it's been really interesting to kind of see how you view certain aspects of Christianity, because I'll be honest with you, I don't have a whole lot of other agnostic friends. So if I was to try to talk to one or even witness to one, so to speak, I wouldn't understand it. So this has helped me understand you better, and it's helped me understand, how to better communicate myself as a Christian. If that time came and you found out there was a God, feelings aside that you had talked about earlier, like, why didn't you show me? What would you hope he'd say to you?
Lived a just and good life, and you help people when they need it, and you didn't turn your back on anyone, come on in. Just to even think of the whole heaven boggles my mind, really, to be honest.
Does everybody's, to be completely honest with you.
And the different beliefs in between the different sects of Christianity. I was baptized, so according to the Catholics, I get to go no matter what. So who's right?
It sounds like the legalism of it all is one thing that really makes you question things. And I say that because that's kind of where I came from. With my mom and I, she doesn't believe in my faith. Now, am I going to judge my mom? No. My faith tells me I'm not supposed to do that. But the legalism that she deals with, well, I don't say she deals with, that she's used to in her life, because it's what she was brought up in. It's taught her that. And it's made me at times growing up like, well, you say I'm going to hell, but this religion over here says I'm okay. I think that's the hard part of faith, because you have to kind of take a stance. And you got to say, okay, I'm going to choose to believe that. I do applaud you in the fact that even though we don't agree on that, you're making a stance. I'd be lying if I didn't say one day I want to see you sit beside me in church. But the thing is, though, I know that regardless, I love you. I respect you. I'm going to treat you good anyway. I think as Christians, we need to realize we can't argue truth and argue faith into people. I think it also goes the other way, like you were talking about earlier. I wish we could figure that out, because I think if we figured that out, Eric, it would solve all the problems. It's communication, right?
Yeah, communication and respect and honesty. You just kind of have to have that respect in every aspect of life, I think. You're free to do what you want, but remember, your freedom stops where mine begins. Ronald Reagan even gave a speech saying, we have to have separation of church and state. Kind of the whole point of us coming over here was so other people couldn't tell us how to worship. We got to get back to where we just love each other and support each other as human beings.
How do you feel when people say, you know what, dude, I'll pray for you? When they say it in a loving way, what goes through your head?
Thank you.
Awesome.
I was in the hospital way back, and Josh Vargas, you know who Josh Vargas is?
Oh, yeah, I know Josh. Yep.
Well, he come walking by the room and saw me in there. He come in, he was like, can I pray with you? Sure, knock yourself out. I'm not going to tell him no. He's doing something that he thinks is going to help me.
Yeah.
Why would I be offended at that? When I go into the hospital, I say, I'm not religious. I don't need a clergy member to come in and pray with me every day or whatever.
Sure.
Pastor Joey has done the same thing, and go ahead. My mother-in-law all the time says, I'm praying for you. Thanks. I don't think it's useful, but it's the same thing as saying, I care about you.
See, that's interesting. Like, I don't think prior to this conversation, I would have thought that that's how you'd react. And I think that's probably where another misconception is. But at the same time, I think there's probably Christians that want to say that, but at the same time, maybe they don't want to upset you either. I could see that too. So that's interesting that that's how you feel. So that's good to know.
Yeah, I'm thinking about you. Yeah. To me, that's the sentiment. And I'm great with good vibe. But it's when they do it sarcastically is when it's like, really? And religious people, like when something happens to them, I'm not going to say I'm going to pray for you because I'm not. Yeah. But, I'm thinking of you or whatever. Yeah. To me, somebody saying they're going to pray for me is the same thing.
Because they're doing it from a point of view that they do care.
Yeah. Yeah. Whether it's right or wrong, whether it works or not, it's a sentiment from one human being to another one saying, I'm thinking about you, I care.
Yeah.
And, there's nothing more beautiful than that when you love another human being just because.
I'm gonna leave with this question. From your perspective, how can the church better serve agnostics? How can we improve to not push you guys away?
That's a rough question to answer because no matter how good the church leadership is, you've always got those members. I'd love to be able to go, sit in church for the community.
Yeah.
You go see each other, and that was one thing I missed was just the community. I was an usher.
Sure.
I'd helped with the youth group, and it was fun even without the belief part because you were making a difference in your community. Operation Foundation, for example.
Sure. Yeah.
I basically got told that this is just a Christian event when I'd helped since it was started. One year I ran a group leader, and then I'm not a Christian anymore, so it's a Christian event. That would be a way of, showing non-believers or people who are on the fence or wherever they might be in life and love one another and help one another.
And honestly, too, from my side of it, it doesn't make a lot of sense to me to not include people such as yourself. Being completely transparent, like I want to see you in heaven one day. But if I push you to the side, how's that helping you? Like from my point of view, I'm going to say around like, I'm sorry that you got told that because that's not right. If I'm being transparent, that's not what our faith teaches. And I think you know that because we're supposed to love each other and create opportunities to serve one another. And when the Bible says to love your neighbor as you love yourself, it doesn't say love your neighbor if they're a Christian, like you love yourself. You're supposed to love your neighbor in spite of what they might believe, like you love yourself. You need to be a good witness. You need to be a good servant.
Supposed to show the love and the humility of Christ. A lot of times that never comes through.
Some words from my friend, Eric Lang. Guys, I want to take a moment to tell you a little story about my aunt and how our witness can have both a positive and a negative effect on how we go about it, the consequences that can take place. This aunt of mine was a sweetheart. She's been gone for many years now, but early on in my marriage to Jamie, I worked with her at a factory in Ligonier. Now, this was early in my faith, so I was still trying to figure out witnessing and what it was like, and to be quite honest with you, I wasn't really good at it. I didn't know enough about my faith yet to properly win anybody over, so to speak. But there was this lady that she worked beside of night in and night out that had been a Christian for many, many, many years. But that's where it's disappointing. This lady had every opportunity to tell my aunt about the love of Christ, the blessings, about salvation, and really pour into her because they spent 8 to 10 hours beside each other 5 to 6 days a week. Instead, my aunt dreaded going to work. Not because she would talk to her about Jesus, so to speak, but because she constantly was telling her, you're going to hell, you're going to hell, you're going to hell. She would tell her she's wrong all the time. And she would try to convince my aunt through fear, through pressure. She never showed my aunt love. Don't get me wrong. I know there's consequences to not accepting God's love, to not accepting Christ as your Lord and Savior. I get that. But this lady spent years with her and had every opportunity to help win her over and to be Jesus to her, and failed miserably. And guys, I love you enough, and I love the people like my aunt enough to tell you we've got to do better. We can't be like that. We need to find common ground. We need to show love, and we need to be Jesus wherever we're at. Paul tells us in Colossians chapter 4, 5 through 6, to be wise in the way that you act towards outsiders. Make the most of every opportunity. Let your conversation always be full of grace, seasoned with salt, so that you may know how to answer everyone. That's the kind of witness we need to be. That's the kind of Christian we need to be. We shouldn't be out trying to prove our faith, but rather to serve them, to be servant leaders, to love them, and to cherish them wherever we're at. Sometimes as Christians, what we fail to realize is we actually have a lot in common with our friends like Eric. In the days of the early church, believers were often slandered. Christians were often called atheists because they served no visible God. They were called unpatriotic because they did not burn incense before the image of an emperor. And they were often called immoral because, out of necessity, they would often meet behind locked doors, and that's where they'd worship. They were criticized for what they believed. They were put down because they didn't believe what society believed at the time. And in many ways, that continues today. But the point of the show is, often Christians, we get caught up in the argument. We get caught up in trying to prove our faith in Christ to those that believe differently. And in doing so, we push them away and we start arguments. Instead of building bridges, we're tearing them down. We're burning them. And that's what's got to stop. We need to realize we actually have a lot in common. Why in the world are we taking these opportunities and wasting them? Why aren't we showing love? And why aren't we being Jesus whenever we get the chance? I hope you guys have taken away the one common thread throughout all of this today, and that's love. We got to show love. We need to be Jesus. That's one thing that I can't emphasize enough. John 15:12 says it best. This is my commandment, that you love one another as I have loved you. I want to challenge you guys. The next time you get into a conversation with someone that is agnostic, that is an atheist, ask yourself, are the words I'm communicating showing love? Am I truly being Jesus, or am I just being critical? Am I trying to convince him of something, or am I just trying to show him love? Ultimately, that's what we're supposed to do. Show love. Next week on Keep Digging, we're going to tackle a really hard-hitting subject. We're going to talk about porn addiction from a Christian perspective. Joining me next week will be my friends Chad Miller and Kyle Black. This is a topic I don't think the church handles well. We don't talk about it a lot within the church setting. It's often a very secret sin. It's a private sin, but it's one that is hitting the church in every way possible, and it's affecting the marriages, the relationships, not only with our wives, but with our kids. And it's something we need to get a hold on. We got to know how to deal with. Often this problem is handled best through a husband and wife as a team, but unfortunately many times there's a lot of hurt involved. And rather than work together on this, it divides them and kind of reinforces the struggle that's already there. I hope you guys will join me next week as we talk about this, not only from a male perspective, but you ladies, there's a lot in this episode that's going to help you help your man that might be struggling with a porn addiction. There's a lot of great advice and who else to talk about it and lend that advice that those guys that are struggling with the addiction themselves. Share this episode on your social media accounts. Rate us. Be sure to subscribe. We greatly appreciate it. If you're a Christian and you use your faith in a really interesting way, have a faith-based job, or going through a struggle that your faith is shining through, I'd love to hear from you. Text me at 260-205-7318 or email me at KeepDiggin, that's DIGGIN, today at gmail.com. Well, that's it for this week's show, guys. Thanks for tuning in and join me for another episode of Keep Digging. Until next time, keep fighting and just keep digging.
Faith, family, fight.
There may be only minutes, seconds left of someone's life. Why waste time?
Just keep digging.